And Kyroot said, page 1 was requested tonight. At any given moment, the ideas, beliefs, and theories of a people are to compensate for the fact that they have none. For those of you getting good, see, the better you get, the more obtuse, abstruse, obscure, complex have to become the metaphors and the symbols. This could have been put, if we were simple, ordinary social critics, it could be something like this. This is what ordinary people would want to hear if they just turned on and heard this and was the kind that consider their intellectual banquet to be National Lampoon or Mad Magazine. Would have been something like, the beliefs and theories of a people are to compensate for the fact that they have no real knowledge, that their beliefs are to compensate. Of course, it would kind of meld it up better, like a people's cultural mores, their religious beliefs, are to compensate for the fact that they don't know crap. See, Kyroot presented it in a little bit better way, not simply to show off or to try and bedazzle those who might be already satiated on the fine works of Mad Magazine and other such periodicals, but as to make you consider the fact that once I present it to you that way, then this almost makes no sense if you were listening with ordinary mind, because then you'd want to say, well, the other way, okay. But this, it just becomes a non sequitur, and it's not. Because it doesn't give you a choice. It doesn't say that a people's beliefs are to compensate for the fact that they have no real knowledge. It says that their beliefs, their ideas, and their theories are to compensate for the fact that they have none. I repeat, if you were listening and trying to consider this in some sequential manner, you could only come to the conclusion that it's just absolutely a childish conundrum. There's just blatantly a non sequitur for some obscure reason that Kyroot thought that it would sound impressive to people with very teensy-weensy IQs. It's not. He's not disagreeing. If it were, he could have surely written it another way. Or if I thought it was, I don't think I'd even took a stab at trying to say something about it. But consider the fact that at any given moment, with ordinary minds, he says people, but you know what he's talking about, with the minds of people, that the people's ideas, their beliefs, their theories, which about covers the whole corral, are to compensate for the fact that they have none. Now do you see? Shall I pretend that somebody answered? Well, I'll read this one. There's nothing to be said. There's a slight series tonight that was ran through here that was a thread of 3 or 4. And this is a part of it. Whether the rest of them pop up or not, it's up to you. Kyroot noted, I know this, the reason I'm reading again, I know it sounds probably trickier than it reads. A man without an aim can sprout a beard. Dash, a woman, comma, a man. I could take a cheap shot and say, anyone who doesn't understand that, I'm glad I don't live in the same condo unit with you. All right, hint. It has something to do with, the word starts with an H. And it's not hernia. And Kyroot offered a fictional, right-angled, ultimate, ultra-violent view of history as current events. As concerns the two major groups on this planet that make up this planet's population, the primary continues to starve while the secondaries grow increasingly difficult to entertain. We don't have to look anywhere. It is true. This is symbolic. Continues to be. It's not metaphorical. That at the primary level, there are literally people on this planet that continue to starve. There's always been people starving. They continue to starve, regardless of the theories and the ideas that people have. So that's a symbolic fact. It's not metaphorical. But then considering you, what is it that the primary wants? Those of you who are getting good enough that for your own functional purposes that you can, non-verbally, so to speak, consider yourself to be this kind of dual population of your own world. What is it that the primary, if you had to say something about it, what does it do? Now, of course, it literally is not starving like some of the poor people in parts of the world that do not have literally enough to eat. But it starves. If the primary could speak, if it did somebody a great favor, they say, all right, you can say one thing. You can speak once in your lifetime. What would it say? It would be something about it starving. I was pushing a little bit. It'd be something about being hungry, and not necessarily for food. It could be for sex. It could be for warmth. It could be for additional cooling. But it would be on the basis that it is continuing to starve. That's what keeps it alive, is it's about to starve. And then consider in the secondary world, symbolical if you want to look at it out there, what is it now? What is, if you don't know, I think the government's latest figures, this projections are, I think it's in the next 10 years that the field that will have the greatest gross income on this planet will be entertainment. Once you're past the point of being simply a primary animal, once you are in the bosom of civilization, living in Paris and London, even if it's just internally, but it helps actually live there as opposed to Hot Springs, Arkansas, probably. But what is it that people now do? Those living in Paris, we're talking about the ordinary Parisian, the ordinary Roman, not somebody homeless. But what are they doing? They're not starving. That's minor. The actual care and feeding of the physical body, the primary world. What is it that by and large they're doing nowadays? Attempting to entertain themselves. And now you can bypass all that and consider you. There is a Kyroot, I guess I can make up on the spot, that the revolution could be called the attempt at the ultimate secondary entertainment, or self-entertainment, when you know how to do it, rather than thinking the TV show will entertain you. It is a continuing, if you're ordinary, I guess you would say, sort of struggle. And there's another Kyroot in here tonight, I don't know if anybody asked for it, that those with little talent in the sophisticated world tend to give more increasing concern about their appearance, while those with a bit end up talking more. Kyroot could have made that absolutely track this one. Instead of talking about talent, talk about the primary and the secondary world. Because the more you're living in the primary world, even if you are an up-to-date, sophisticated, college-educated, hip person living in London, if you, in the midst of the secondary world, at its best, if you are still more of a primary sort, if you are a bricklayer in some way, you got a college education, inherited some money, and you do end up living in Rome or Paris, what is it you're going to do, man or woman? It's weighted due to hormones, but they're still the same thing. You end up being more concerned about how you look, working out in the gym, saving up for new clothes, new haircut, physical, plastic surgery. It's a form of starvation, but it is a form of feeding the primary body. The secondary body, if you're ordinary, the concern becomes to feed it, and rather than its appearance, you end up nowadays talking more. That again, we go through too many corners. You can be hip and sophisticated. You can be living around 30 degrees latitude and yet be physically living in Belfast. For those of you who can picture geography. In other words, you could be, your body, you could be living in Paris, and yet internally you could be 20 degrees latitude behind yourself. You could be a bricklayer dressed up with a nose job, hair transplants. If you inherited enough money, I guess you could have bought it, peerage from some broken down, out of work royalty in Europe. But if you are living primarily in the primary world yourself, you end up being, by all accounts, in the full sense of the word, you end up being concerned about your appearance. In all senses. Not just physical, but that's the easy one to point. But if you're ordinary and you are more hip, don't jump to conclusion and think, well, then you'd start becoming a revolutionist. No, you just start talking more. That if this fictitious bricklayer, who is now pretty hip, been hanging around Europe, hanging out at least with the upper middle classes for a change, thinking he's somebody, let us say that for some reason he began to gradually shift some of his weight into a secondary world. That he's got the nose job, he got all the clothes, he got all the car, he is taking care of appearance, and for some reason he gets a little more in the secondary. What's the next thing he'd want to do? Get on the Donahue show. To talk more. But nowadays it's not just talk more, because he can already talk around the disco wherever he's out hanging with people. Now he wants to talk more. Not just him, everyone. It is part of, I suggest to you, that if indeed governments are correct, which I won't naysay it, that entertainment is becoming the growth industry of the whole planet, which is just hobbies of the secondary man, then part of it is that everybody in the world wants to be on television. That's talking more nowadays. It's not just talking more, just bricklayers can talk. I mean, they can talk all day long, and they do. But that's not talking more in the secondary sense. That's primary people still being concerned about their appearance. If you're going to talk in the secondary world, you got to talk under secondary conditions, you got to talk to secondary people, you got to talk in milieux that seem to be far removed from the primary. And what could be more far removed from a bricklayer who grew up hanging around people with fifth grade education? And as far as this quantity of talk, I assume all of you have been around the wonderful building trades enough to know there is no dearth of conversation amongst plumbers and drywall men and bricklayers and carpenters. It's just a running babble. But it means nothing. And if this guy got over, my fictitious man, over that kind of environment, in other words, he became a better person. He sort of outgrew that. He would, when I say he wants to talk more then in the secondary world, it's not just talk more, it's talk more. He wants to be on television, and his old friends, and especially his new friends, which he hopes to have, but even his old friends go, look at there, it's Homer on TV, all dressed up, and they're interviewing him like he's a real person. That's talking more. Back to you individually, the Kyroot, of course, none of this had to do with any sort of useful observation, since there are none, of the social ramblings of the jet set. It has to do with a person internally, that you are faced with this continually. Of the two major groups making up the world's populace, which, who cares about the world's populace? You're talking about your world's populace. The two major food groups, parsley and no, I got confused. The secondary and the primary groups. And your primary group is at all times starving, and the hipper it gets at all, concerned about its appearance. That's the height of its sophistication. That is its ultimate in social climbing. Man or woman, that if you are living, if the weight of what you are internally is on the primary level, then as high as you're ever going to get, just to put it real quickly, would be whatever your dream is. If I could just get my nose straightened, if I could lose permanently 50 pounds, and if perhaps if my headlights were 3 inches bigger, or if I was 2 inches taller, if you got all of that, that is it. What else could you aspire to? There is nothing. And then if that did wear you out, which it can internally, then you are faced with giving more consideration to the secondary's needs. And its needs is, I want to talk more. It must be entertained. The primary simply has got to be fed. You don't have to entertain it. But this, you got to entertain. Okay, somebody requested one, but there was three of them that are sort of connected, so I'll read all three. And Kyroot said, one purpose life makes of history is to give man some vague sense of equity. And Kyroot said, man's memory is like a leveraged buyout. And then Kyroot added, secondarily speaking, on the individual level, memory makes it all work. At the first one, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you'll be able to see it. What part of the purpose of history, and this is not in any way a critique or any real observation of the discipline of history itself, but history, as you just normally think about it, which includes the teaching of history and history books and all that, but what seems to be history. It gives, one of the purposes that Kyroot points out, it gives man a vague sense of equity. Because if you look at history, any particular area, if you're just ordinary with your mind and you look at some area, and let's say you pick out one that your culture or your religion or your family, your nation, it at one point seemed to have been the victim of some hostility, some injustice was inflicted on them. But once it becomes history, you can look back. And part of what it does is give a sense that, well, they paid for it. It gives a vague sense of equity, that the further you get away from events, they may smell bad. You may think, boy, it was terrible the way those unwashed Huns, those soon-to-be Germans, came down and just absolutely they just messed up the Roman Empire so bad that they never got over it. Just shame on them. But you get far enough away. Now, if you start out, and let's say that you were literally a student of history, and you came into that area of history, and it really caught your fancy, and you became a personal fan of the Roman Empire, and you read and read and read and read and read, and you just absorbed it and just at night dreamed how it would be if you'd been actually there during the glory days of the Roman Empire. But then you began to read about all these Huns, all these people coming out of Northeast Asia, strangers, men with unwashed togas, some that didn't even have a decent toga. And they began to come in and spit and not speak Italian or Latin. Just absolutely uncouth people, and you could become real concerned over it. And I'm not making fun of somebody. You could sit there literally and become concerned over something that happened 2,000 years ago. But then it's sort of, you get your intellectual perspective. This is history. Because the further you get away from it, as terrible as it seemed to be, that there was civilization. I mean, in fact, that was, without any doubt, once you study history, they point out to you, that was the beginning. That was the cause, if we're going to be crude, of the Dark Ages. It took man another damn near 1,000 years to pull out of it. Because of that, think, we would be 1,000 years more advanced now had the Roman Empire. Surely it would have turned into something else. History goes on. But if it had not, civilization, the height of Western civilization, not been brought to its knees by these unruly characters, then we would have had 1,000 years up and been better off. Blah, blah. But notice, even if you were sitting there, and I just ran through several minutes, what could happen to man, or I'm making it up, but it could happen. As bad as it seemed, the further you get away, the more it seems like, well, there's a certain sense of equity. All right? Would you care and try it in your own life and forget 2,000 years? Second part, man's memory. See, I told you, since maybe you didn't catch on when they were being read, that these three were connected. First one starts out talking about history, gives a vague sense of equity. And then it changes to, the next one, Kyroot said, man's memory is like a leveraged buyout, which I'm suggesting is connected. And then a third one, secondarily speaking, on the individual level, not the human level. Whereas the first one started that it gives man, that history gives mankind a vague sense of equity. Now it's at the individual level, as Kyroot points out, that memory makes it all work. Because at the individual level, were it not for memory, what would work? Whether a person had any recollection, whether in hindsight, if you took the first part of history, whether anyone really had a sense that history was just, that life was fair, even if you denied that, even if you thought you could find some exception. That's not true. History doesn't work that way. Then try the third part. Were it not for history, that is your personal memory, which is history at the personal level, were it not for that, nothing would work. Whether you found that the history of your life had been just and equitable to any reasonable degree or not. And if you had no memory of it, it wouldn't even work. You don't like that one. How about the definition? It was way down that I don't guess we'll ever get to. That Kyroot gave of a poet. It's a failed suicide attempt. That's people's memory of life not being just. It's almost like suicide. Wait a minute, my life's not just. Screw the Roman Empire and all that crap. My life's not just. Yeah, but you got the memory of it. Yeah, but my memory is of all the injustices happened to me. Yeah. You still alive? Yeah. You're a failed suicide attempt. You're a poet. I may be a poet, but I'm a piss poet. Probably even a better chance of being published. Do you see? There's two connected. One request, I'll read them both, and Kyroot said, a description of a completed work requires no metaphor. I can't believe no one requested that. So why does, the obvious question should be, then everything in life can at least be used as a metaphor. Yeah? Okay. Second part. Life chuckled and told some creatures, you guys just wear me out, and then killed them. Life does not require the use of metaphors. Life has weapons that are not even classified by the U.S. Armed Forces. One old man told his daughter, just because you don't know what's going on doesn't make it any different. And for the first time, she realized what was going on. That could be connected to some of the others. And Kyroot said, a king's least favorite at court is the royal comedian. But for reasons unclear to him, and he is, in fact, hesitant to even mention it. Well, somewhere along the metaphorical line, I'm sure that between Kyroot and you and me, point out that, in fact, at King schools, I know that none of you have ever seen a catalog, they don't publish them, but at King schools, I'm talking about serious King schools, even in here, but the ones out there, kings don't laugh. I mean, if you think, well, yeah, they got in public and try to look serious, but in private, I bet they're just a ton of fun. Wrong. And of course, we're in the area of symbolism now, not metaphor, because I assure you, do you imagine, I know I keep picking out, there's no importance, I just pick out historical figures I think everybody knows, but imagine everybody from Nixon, Joseph Stalin. I mean, they can smile and say, vote for me, or smile when they're about to shoot you. But you really think that, well, in private, or, Queen Elizabeth, that you think, well, they try to look serious because they're in a serious position. But I bet, if you got to know them personally and they'd let their hair down, so to speak, and, lay down her handbag, I bet you could tell her a joke, right? I bet she's just witty as hell. No, she's not. No. No. Not at all. And if there was any chance that them had any wit, it's why they have instructors, that there is a king school. That and every now and then they slip through, that somebody shows up in history, they usually get cut down pretty quick, that people show up in some conversation, a pope or a prince or a king, that actually does have some wit, some talent. They ain't long. And if they're going to be long, somebody's got to be around to say, stop that. That's just a fact. You got to understand that as part of the wiring system of humanity. It has nothing to do with royalty. It's got nothing to do with government. It's got nothing to do with politics. It's in the system. Kyroot points out in a different way tonight. A king's least favorite at court is the royal comedian. Now think about it, as some of you have suggested to me, and I like the idea, that maybe Kyroot by king means what seems to be like the core the Sun King, the center of the universe of your brain. It seems to be you. The one thing worthy of some respect, no matter how shoddy you are. I mean, hell, if you're Albania in here, and they did bring back the royalty in Albania, and you could say, well, that's probably the shoddiest royal house in Europe. You could say that, but then you think about it. If you're Albanian, you think, well, maybe, but hell, it's the only king I got. And if he's the only king compared to everybody else in the kingdom, everybody else is going around, sucking on used bicycle tires trying to get some nourishment. And he may be the cheapest, shoddiest, chintziest looking king in Europe. But compared to everybody else, he's still the what? The king. So you can't dismiss him. So according to you people, if you look at the king as being like the core of your own mental processes, that way then we'll also consider that you're not as bad as absolute royalty is out there, that there is some sense of wit to you, that you're just an average person, and what seems to be you, the thing that you think about when you're well fed and you feel like that you're entertained and you might actually be able to get by either without getting a nose job or that you might get enough money to get one, that in other words things are going pretty well, then you're the king, but yet you still have a sense of wit about you, let's say. There is still a kind of, if we'll say it again, a kind of conflict between the king in you and the comedian in you. There's another Kyroot I don't guess we'll get to that a guy points out that we're all laughing stock, and none more so than those who deny it. This is what the king does. This is what a person does if you're ordinary, and you're supposed to. The more ordinary you are, the more you're supposed to do it. I know that people will say things that, I like old so-and-so. I mean, he can take a joke at himself. I mean, you can say something like, well, Bubba, I see you pulling another 50 pounds. You're beginning to look like a walking butterball. Bubba will laugh. You make a laugh. But everybody's been the butt of some old Bubba. How good a joke do you take when somebody says, well, you're looking worse than ever? And everybody laughs, and you laugh along. And they say, it's good for a man to take a joke. And in print, of course, those that pass for good novelists and armchair philosophers engage in what they love to keep repeating as the people being self-effacing. It's as though, I don't take myself all that seriously. A man who tells you he don't take himself all that seriously takes himself very seriously. Now, you got to know that by now. It's like, the obvious one is being a man who is extremely proud of how humble he is. That's all it amounts to. Ordinary men cannot tolerate, past a very limited degree, a court comedian. Now, as long as the comedian laughs, they'll turn to the king and other people come into the court. That is, you can laugh at other people. You can laugh at Bubba, you in the crowd, and then they start laughing at you, and you can laugh along, and at least you'll laugh as much as Bubba laughed when you poke fun at him. But when they laugh at you, you don't have to worry about Bubba. Don't read his goddamn mind. How much do you like it at the ordinary level? That much. But if you're civilized, you laugh along. Say, well, you're right. God, I got to drop some of that weight. The king's least favorite in court, the least part of your favorite part of the brain from the part of you that is you, the part of you that city put on the train, the part of you that life made you, the part of you that probably would agree with one guy back here that's way down in the Kyroot tonight said that he was about sick of all this crap, but he couldn't keep watching, couldn't stop it. The part of you that life made to be you and to get by does not care in his own court for the comedian. You understand? Now, if the comedian makes fun of Prince across there, if he makes fun of Prince Bubba, that's all right. But the king is very uneasy. His least favorite person there in court all the time, the least favorite part of the brain itself to the king is that part that is a comedian. I'll repeat one more time. Now, it's all right as long as the comedian's making jokes out there, but the king understands this guy, he makes fun of all of my enemies. He makes fun of almost anybody that walks in here, and he makes me laugh at him. But now you know where this is going, don't you? It's not psychological. I know it seems that way. But the king understands, if he makes me laugh at everybody else, if he can find something funny about everybody else, do I have to say it? Can you imagine what he must be saying about me behind my back? I mean, if he's got the nerve, but it's obvious he's got the ability. He can tear everybody else apart when they walk in. He can turn to me in just a few words and slice people to pieces. Foreign potentates He can cut them down just a few words. You know, the rest of it, Kyroot points out, he's his least favorite, but for reasons the king doesn't really know. I just kind of told you what it is, because if I said that to a king, if we were playing really people out there and the king had any intelligence, momentarily he could hear it. He'd say, you're right. I knew I never did like that guy. He makes me laugh, and he stick around, but you're right, that's it. If I told him those words, I said, what makes you uneasy? He can look at anybody and just make them, he can just whisper a few words to you. Some guy walk in that looks like a bigger king than you, fancier stuff, and he'll look at him just for a second. He'll whisper over your ear and go blah, 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 and just crack you up. He'll make them look like a walking ass. And what bothers you is, imagine what he thinks about you. Imagine if he wanted to. Maybe he does. Maybe him and just a few other people in the back room, him and some of the butlers and the servants. Can you imagine what he does to you? That sounds psychological. The king's least favorite person is a comedian. He tolerates it, that is, a kind of loose, non-serious attitude inside of one's own personality, to make it short. You'll tolerate, to say the least, making jokes at other people. That's funny. Well, hell, they deserve it. They're overweight, they're ugly, they're dumb. And yet something's uneasy with an ordinary person about that kind of comedy. Notice, in fact, religion will even get into it. They don't call it comedy, but they start the whole thing about, don't be sticking your thumb in somebody else's eye until you realize, you got your big toe in your own. And don't, talk about other people's stink until you go, all that. Which is the same thing. Is do not let the comedian loose, because he'll turn on you. And they turn into a sense of morality. It's at the higher end than that, worrying about morality, about don't laugh at other people until you've walked a mile in their old smelly shoes. That's for children. It's the king up here worrying about the comedian. He's very uneasy. Because this is serious business being king. This is serious business, being alive and being a serious person. Well, you can have a few laughs at other people's expense, because most of the people you laugh at, to varying degrees, deserve it. Well, they're just not that serious. If they were, there'd be no reason to laugh at them. Then you could become, pseudo-humane and say, well, I don't mean any disrespect to these people. They're of a different religion or a different race or a different ethnic group or a different social class, but they're just not serious. That's what makes them funny. I mean, they're behind the times, or they don't understand what's going on. And it makes people uneasy to do it. And you know that, because you can turn to somebody doing it and say, you shouldn't laugh at people. And if they're civilized, people go, and they wish you hadn't done that. But it's not because they feel guilty, and it's not because of some sense of morality and all the stuff that religion says that you shouldn't laugh at people. It's what Kyroot's telling you. Is being alive serious business, and I don't like a comedian. But back to one more time, he'll tolerate it. You will if you laugh at other people, but it's still, you're very uneasy. Because you know damn well that you're as funny as they are. Oh, you just know it for a split second. You're a goddamn laughing stock. Everybody is. Well, I'm not. Of course, they don't know it. They're the ones leading the choir. Good night.